What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the neighborhood. If this is your first time listening, thank you and welcome to our podcast. If you're a returning listener, thank you so much as well. On this episode, we're talking about Remnant 2. Welcome to the podcast where two longtime friends and sometimes a guest talk about their favorite games from the perspective of an average player. My name is Andrew Kimball.
And I'm Dylan Wren, and we are your friendly neighborhood gamers.
Remnant 2 is a third-person shooter action role-playing video game developed by Gunfire Games and published by Gearbox Publishing. A sequel to Remnant from the Ashes, the game was released for PlayStation 5, Windows, and Xbox Series X and S on July 25th, 2023. Like its predecessor, Remnant 2 is a third-person shooter inspired by Soulslike video games. Players can wield up to two guns alongside their melee weapon. While the first game features procedural generation by changing the level's layout and enemy spawn points, it has been significantly expanded in Remnant 2. According to Gunfire Games, enemy types, the aesthetic of a region, boss characters, non-playable characters, and the game's storyline and quests are also randomly generated. Players can play through the entire game solo, though the game also supports a 3-player cooperative multiplayer mode. So for this episode, this is one of those games where the spoiler line is a little bit fuzzy.
Yeah.
So we're just going to put out a full spoiler warning for this whole conversation. That doesn't really mean that we're going to... story is not the biggest thing to talk about in this game. So I feel like a lot of the conversation will still be more gameplay mechanically focused. But we're just going to kind of let the conversation flow however it will and not necessarily segment off talking about things that may be considered spoilers. Because
some people consider the bosses spoilers,
exactly.
Or the weapons you can unlock spoilers or that sort of thing. And so we are going to talk about, it's hard to talk about this game without talking about that stuff. If you really, really care to know our thoughts, there will probably be a timestamp for our verdicts or something at the end.
Yeah.
And so just skip to that, but spoilers, I think we both think this game is worth checking out, especially if you have Game Pass. So
yeah, really for you, the listener, if you're not going to play this game, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if you want to play it, go ahead and play it. This episode will be here for you when you're done.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's kind of in that Souls-like conversation of not just story stuff people consider spoilers. So like you said, it is kind of hard to have a full conversation trying to segment that stuff off. But diving into it, talk about our history with the series. You have a much deeper history with the first game than I do.
Yes. So I had picked up the first game on sale years ago. I forget exactly when the first game came out. I probably should have put that in the quick notes as a reminder of hey, the first game came out. But it was probably 2018 or so. 2019.
That sounds right. Somewhere in there.
Yeah. But it was one of those games like Hunt Showdown and a couple others that I was constantly seeing on lists of hey, this game is really good. You should check it out. You should play it. And it kind of came out to little fanfare, and you would kind of just see opinion pieces on, IGN, on Game Informer, on Polygon, some of those where it was just kind of hey, check this game out. So I picked it up on sale with all the DLC and stuff included, and played through. I think I played through most of the game. I don't know that I made it all the way to the very end of it before I got distracted by something else, but I had a good time with it. And then recently, this year, went back and played through all of it again, just because I was hey, I want to, check this out from, I've been hearing good things about the second game. I never beat the first game. Let me go ahead and hammer that out. And then if I'm still interested, I'll probably pick up the second game. And it was a lot of fun. I liked the style of the gameplay, where it's, I would say this game, the second one, really focuses more on like the sort of puzzly.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot more in the first game that felt like you were just shooting things.
Right.
And like the boss battles of the first game, there were bosses in it that felt like, okay, I'm trying to, like, I've got to not just shoot this. I've also got to like pay attention to my surroundings and environment and, you know, do whatever this boss's gimmick is. But it feels like they turned that part up to like 11 in Remnant 2. And so still a very good game. Still, I think worth checking out. It definitely, to me, did not like we talked in the thing from Wikipedia that we read earlier about how the first game was procedurally generated, but they've stepped it up for this one. And that's definitely true, because there are parts of the first game where it's like you may not see every boss, you may not see every like area necessarily, but it was more so like the differences in enemy spawns. It wasn't necessarily like and differences in enemy spawns and then like a few different bosses through each zone, not like completely different storylines through each zone. So the story, what there was of it in the first game, because it's still definitely very vague and told through item descriptions that I didn't read.
Right.
And there is not a Vati Vidya that I have found that, like, there are people that do like here's the story of the first game thing, but
yeah,
it's not like, it's usually just the one video of like, here is the story of Remnant, and then none of the follow-ups that like Vati Vidya and all of them are doing. So
yeah, there's no like deep lore breakdowns.
Yeah.
Wasn't the first game different in like your character too? Because this one is class like archetype based. Did they do that in the first game? Did you play as archetypes?
I don't think so.
I want to say that was a new thing they were talking about a lot in the marketing for this game.
I could be wrong. Like, I think you may have potentially like chosen like a starting class, which affected like your initial guns and maybe some stats or something.
Yeah.
Or like where your perk points were slotted.
But you didn't have like special skills and stuff tied to an archetype.
Yeah, so all of the special skills were tied to guns.
Right.
In the first game. And so that was a big difference to this one too.
Yeah, because I played the first game a little bit. I think it was on Game Pass for a while, which they're both back on Game Pass now. Right after we purchased them.
Yeah, I was going to say.
They came to or purchased the second one and talked all about it on our last Neighborhood Watch about how it was on sale and everything. It was like 3 days after you bought it, they came to Game Pass or something.
Yeah. Like we talked about it. Like you talked about picking it up and I was like, oh, I should pick that up. And then I did. And then like that Tuesday it was on Game Pass. I think we recorded on like Saturday or something. So
I played it the first time around on Game Pass and I got to the second zone, the kind of like deserty one. And I was like, oh, I don't understand what this game is.
Yeah.
We just like teleported to this other world and stuff. And then like you got distracted by something else and then it disappeared. And it was one that I kind of thought about going back to, but then it wasn't available to me anymore and I wasn't going to buy it.
Yeah.
But then all the stuff leading up to Remnant 2 made it seem like a pretty significant step up. And I was like, you know, I like the feel of the game enough that I want to try this one. And so I spent a lot more time with Remnant 2 and actually understanding how the game wants you to play it with the different zones and the procedural generation and those kind of things being the core mechanic and not that you're just trying to rush to the end and finish the story. It's more about replaying things, but differently, creating a build or a character that you like. Those are more of the hooks as opposed to going through handcrafted levels that some developer wants you to see. So I understood the game a lot better. And it was just sitting down and playing for a full afternoon by myself in Remnant 2 where it was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to see the hooks and the loop here.
Yeah.
And then once I got that, then I was all in and I ended up rolling credits on the second one.
Yep. Yeah. And I have beaten the second one once and started like the New Game Plus, like re-roll of the campaign thing and have made it to the final boss again. I haven't beaten that final boss yet because Baldur's Gate 3 finally came to Xbox.
Yes, yes, it did. I have beaten the game once, and I've done some adventure mode role things.
Yeah. Well, and this might be a good place to like talk. So like the campaign starts you off with like a tutorial section, which is the same every time. And then you follow Ford, who is like a character you were looking for in the first game. You follow him into like the hub world from the first game. And he touches the big crystal and gets sucked in, and then your like friend gets sucked in, and then so you were like, okay, I'm gonna go touch the crystal, and you get sucked in, and so it sucks you into one of 3 different worlds. So your starting zone can be either like this sort of Fey Satyr world called Yesha, like a foresty world.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a sci-fi robots and like kind of zombies world called Nerud, and or it can be a elves Victorian Gothic horror world called Losum. And so it can be one of those 3. And so you start in that world, you go through that world, then you go to the labyrinth, which is kind of the connecting place between all of the worlds in the game, and then you can do the other 2 that you didn't start in. And then you get to the final world where it's like, what happened? What if the big bad guys of the game won? And you go to that world and you beat them.
Does it play the same way every first time?
No.
We had the exact same path.
Yeah, we had the exact same path. We both had Yesha, then Losum, then Nerud.
Mm-hmm.
But it does not always start that way. So my second playthrough, it started in Nerud.
Well, that's what I'm wondering is if the first time you play the game, if you always get that order,
Oh, yeah.
And then on subsequent like re-rolls or whatever, it might randomize them a little bit more.
I don't... You're the only other person I know in person that's played it. I will say I watched like Iron Pineapple's like review of it once I had beaten the game. And his started off in Losum and then went to Nerud and then went to Yesha last.
Interesting. And it was just new game?
Yeah, and it was just the regular, like it looked like it was their first run through the game itself. So it seems like that is a thing that I think it was just a random like, oh, we happen to have the same thing. But even so each world itself has like 2 different main storylines that you can get going through it. So our first one was the same, but our second one was different. Like I had in Losum, I had like the Imposter King storyline, and I think you had the Night Mother or whatever storyline. Like you had to kill the ghost lady in the asylum.
Yeah.
So I hadn't done that before.
Yeah, because you were saying when we did the whole like court prove somebody guilty thing, you hadn't done that in your game.
Yeah, so your storyline for your second zone was different than mine, and then your storyline for the third zone was different than mine.
Do you know if the adventure mode, which we haven't really touched on yet, do you know if that rolls the same as your main playthrough, and then you like unlock new adventure modes you can play, or is that random every time too? Because I've only done the first world and I've gotten the same story.
That is different every time as well.
Okay.
I did have to, so I was trying to like get a certain gun or something. Yeah. And so I just kept re-rolling the first zone until I got the other one, but I got the same first zone like 2 or 3 times before before it gave me the other zone where you're like talking to the queen, and like there were a bunch of enemies I had never seen before. And
interesting. And
so I was like, oh, like this is kind of neat. Because we both got the one where it had already been kind of overwhelmed with like corruption or whatever.
Yeah.
Which worked for you because like you were trying to get a very specific gun from that boss that you fight at the end of that zone or corruption thing. So
yeah, I fought that boss 3 times. Once in my main game, once in my adventure that I rolled, and then once in your game where I finally got the gun.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's interesting because I feel like I could be done with this game. Like I saw credits, it was a good experience.
Yeah.
Like I enjoyed it. But talking to you now, I'm kind of thinking, well, maybe I do want to just force me into the other scenarios I didn't see, like roll that. Because like you said, you rolled it until you got it. What that means is basically you can restart your campaign or the adventure mode at any time and just like reset the world state.
Yeah.
And so you could do that until you get the different one. But if you do that for the full game, you can really only determine your first world, because after that you have to beat the game. But you can do that for the adventure mode for just specific areas, which is another kind of cool thing they did, where it's like if you just want to keep rerunning an area to try to get a gun or whatever, they've set up this like it's like a parallel game you can have going at the same time as your main story, and they don't affect each other. So you could be rerunning, like what I did. I ran the first area again after you and I did it together. I ran it again in adventure just to kind of get a feel for the game. And then once I finished that, I was like, okay, that's cool. And I hopped back into the story.
Yeah.
Not only feeling better about the game, but having a better character going into that second world, because I was getting my teeth kicked in because I was trying to play through that world a lot more on my own. Whereas we had started playing co-op and we're basically just steamrolling everything that we encountered. And so I was having to actually learn how to play my class and play my build and play the game. So going in and doing that adventure allowed me to get some more equipment and get like a better stuff, but also a better understanding of how to play my character.
Yeah. That's something that I would say too, is like, if once you beat the game, I think it's probably worth at least maybe re-rolling in adventure mode for those 3 like other experiences, because like then you get to see at least like the big final bosses of those, which are kind of like cool.
That's true.
But yeah, it is one of those things where it's kind of like similar to Diablo for me, where it's like, okay, after you beat the game a time or two and have seen a lot of the bosses, it suddenly becomes like, okay, now I'm just trying to get like upgrade materials, and I'm trying to get maybe the last few pieces of gear for my specific build so that I can keep trying to do it on harder and harder difficulty modes.
So that's the end game then, because it's just beating it on harder. Because that's the thing, is I did see some people complaining in reviews and stuff that Remnant 2's end game was not as good as Remnant 1's, but I don't really know what they did differently this time around. And
I don't either, because that was my impression of what Remnant 1's end game was, and maybe I just didn't get deep enough into it to figure that out. But I thought it was just do it again on a harder difficulty. And I don't even know really. Well, there was DLC for Remnant 1 that was kind of like a harder zone, and like
but there's DLC for 2 as well, right?
Yeah,
we played the standard edition.
Yeah, the DLC came out. I think it adds another storyline to the second world, or to Loathsome. I don't know. Like, I think that's what it does.
Gotcha.
I don't know if it is separate, like you go back to it. It's called The Awakened King. And so like the whole storyline of Loathsome was
that would kind of make sense.
Yeah. Like they killed the king, but not really, because you couldn't actually kill him. They just like put him into a sleep that he would never wake up from, but I guess he does wake up. But yeah, I don't know if that's like, reading a little bit about it, I wasn't clear on like if it was just like now there are 3 storylines and you get one of the 3, or if it was a like, after you beat the game, here is now after credits stuff that you can go do, or after the final boss stuff you can go do. But it adds a new archetype, it adds new weapons, it adds new bosses and stuff. So
interesting.
I have a ring that I picked up that I can't wear because I don't own the DLC. It was weird that it dropped me a ring that is locked by the DLC.
Yeah, you shouldn't be able to get it in your game if
I'm pretty sure I'm not supposed to have it, but it dropped, and now it's just like, you can't use this though because you don't own the DLC.
Wow, that's weird.
It is an interesting like way that they do it too, because like I said, the first game you had no like the story wasn't different. It was just like you were going through the same exact procedurally generated zone. And it was just like you maybe had some different bosses in it. And the enemies spawned in some different locations. Whereas this one,
the structure of the zone didn't change at all.
The main structure didn't, I think, like, because all of them have like different
like side dungeons.
Yeah. And so similar to how Remnant 2 does it, where it's like, okay, here is this zone. There are 3 different like places that a side dungeon will spawn, and each of those side dungeon spawns can be like one of 3 different dungeons, or one of like, I don't know if it pulls from like a small pool or if it pulls from just like the entire thing. But each one is just kind of like, hey, there are multiple different side dungeons. You're not going to see them all on your first playthrough, or maybe even like your second, or like,
right.
There are going to be some where it's always, since it's random chance, there's a possibility that like you could play the game through like 3 or 4 times and still be seeing new stuff that you haven't seen before. And that doesn't mean everything's going to be new. Like, I think that's where I'm not going to say the marketing is a little deceptive, but like, it's not like New Game Plus is a completely different experience unless you just happen to get all 3 different zones, you know?
Right.
But you're still going to be seeing some of the same side dungeons. But there is always like, there's stuff that some of the dungeons you just won't see because random chance, it's not going to happen. And if you play through it 4 or 5 times, the new stuff that you're seeing gets less and less, but there is still new stuff, you know?
Yeah, it's a really cool structure and concept for a game, especially a game like this, like a third person shooter action game where it's like a blend of roguelike, blend of dungeon crawler, but with a lot of times those games are on the more indie side, or at least feeling budget wise, whereas this is like, you know, fully fledged third person shooter, the co-op, everything, it all feels really good. So it's cool to see that kind of structure in a game like this. It was very, I think that's one of the things about the first game, and then starting the second one, it was very kind of just confusing about what am I doing, where am I going, why. And it was after I spent like a good chunk of time like fully exploring a zone and realizing, okay, so it's basically like this is the hub of this zone, and then there are, or it's more like you go into a big area where you're fighting stuff, and then there will be a fork, and at one side of the fork is an optional dungeon, the other side of the fork is the main quest to keep progressing. So you can just power through the main quest if you want, or you can go do the side stuff to get whatever gear it might give you, experience, you know, see numbers go up.
Yeah.
And so once I kind of started seeing that structure and realizing, okay, that's how the game is made and how the puzzle pieces fit together, then the loop and the point of the game got a lot more clear. But just like when it drops you in, especially if you didn't know anything about the game going into it, and you're just thinking it's like a third person shooter or whatever, it's a very different structure, and they don't really explain it to you. It's kind of like get in there and figure it out. Yeah.
Which is, you know, very Soulsy.
Yeah. How well do you think this fits into the Souls box?
See, and that's, I don't know.
Because in some ways, it's way more forgiving than a traditional Souls game. Like you don't lose your souls on, like, have to go retrieve your souls on death and stuff like that. It does do the rest and everything respawns, and it does give you a dodge roll with iframes.
And you do create like kill bosses and then create weapons out of there.
Yeah. But like in the combat, when you're doing the dodges and iframes, it's way less essential than in like a Bloodborne or something.
Yeah, like, well, and this has like difficulty settings, and on like the first 2 difficulty settings, you can kind of get away a lot of times with just like tanking it a little bit, especially if you're playing, you know, one of the classes that has a little bit of extra survivability built in. And so it's like, oh, okay, like I think that one of the classes I rolled first was like Challenger, and so like its whole thing is like once every 10 minutes, if you go down, like you just get back up. And it's like, oh, okay. So like I didn't learn how to dodge roll as much as well in the beginning because I was playing that class, because I was like, I'll just, if I get taken down, I've got one chance to get back up anyway.
Well, and the whole thing with Souls combat most of the time is you're fighting things one-on-one a lot.
Yeah.
In this game, you're fighting hordes of things. Not like hordes, but you're fighting 5 or 6 things at a time in a lot of different directions. So your character has to be able to take some shots to the back and not immediately die or stagger into oblivion. So there is some of that where I think because it's a third-person shooter, some of those systems can't work the same as they would in like a melee focused game.
At least I'd say especially in like the open zone combat stuff.
Yeah.
Like the bosses, I would say definitely get closer to that. Like this is a Souls-like sort of box, especially like the final boss of the whole game, I would say is definitely like you gotta roll a lot of times. But
they still drop ads in there with you. And a lot of time that's like to give you ammo and stuff back.
Mm-hmm.
But that is a distraction that in most Souls bosses is not there.
Yeah. And so, except for like Shadows of Yharnam and stuff where it's just some BS. But yeah, no, I can see all of the inspiration it takes from Souls-likes.
Yeah.
When I think of a Souls-like, I definitely am thinking more of like the melee combat. So it's hard for me to like, what would a ranged combat Souls-like look like? And so like, maybe this is.
If you didn't call it that, what would you call it?
I guess that was where I was going, is like, so would I just call it a third person action adventure game then? Like a third person shooter, like
It's definitely a third person shooter.
Yeah.
It's not a cover shooter. You don't like lock to cover or anything. It really is, I think, probably
I feel like
third person shooter Souls action game.
Like a Souls inspired third person shooter, or Souls like because I think that gives the people that would be interested in it enough to go with.
Yeah.
I do think saying Souls like potentially drives some people away because they're like, oh, I don't like Souls likes.
Yeah.
And I do think, like you said, this is way more approachable than your average Souls like.
Yeah, like you said, there's difficulty settings. I mean, we both play on console, but like there's aim assist and stuff like it's your pretty standard third person shooter. It's just some of the mechanics are borrowed from the Souls genre, and it's mostly in like structure and enemy spawns and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But one thing it does that I guess some Souls games do as well, and maybe equally as annoyingly, are some of the puzzles.
Yeah.
So where did you end up landing on like your opinion of the puzzles? Because basically the two things you're doing in this game actively are shooting enemies and dodging their attacks, and then solving environmental puzzles.
Yes.
And some of these environmental puzzles are like, find a symbol on a piece of paper, then find all of the coffins that have that symbol on the blanket that's draped over them, and then look at the symbol above those coffins, and then those are the 4 symbols you need to put on this dial to open this door. And I looked that up.
Yeah.
I was like, this is just a bit too far on the obtuse side of the like puzzle scale for me.
Yeah. That specific thing that you're talking about, I was where I was kind of like, all right, let's calm it down with this puzzle thing.
Yeah.
Here. Because that was a side dungeon that had very few enemies, if any at all. Really.
It had some, but yeah.
But it had the
buzzsaws to get into that room.
Yeah. Well, so you started off with, and it was like a little arrow shooting trap maze that you had to walk through. And the arrows would like insta kill you if you got hit by them. And crouching. So you had to like, it would shoot on one side then the other. So you had to like go back and forth and like figure that out.
I found out that no matter where you were, if you were crouched, they would all shoot above you.
Yeah.
So I was able to crouch. There was one part where I can't remember if they were like coming from a different, like they switch it up on like the third hallway or whatever, where that didn't work anymore. Yeah. But once I figured that out, I was able to just crouch through the first two. I just stand there, like crouch there and wait for it to shoot over me. I was like, okay, the hit did not detect. So
yeah. So you do that, and then you get to a part where, like you were saying, where it's like you read a little thing in a journal, and it's like you have to like put 2 and 8 together to get 10, because it's not just like putting 2 and 2 together. Yeah. It's like you have to, it skips it. It's like draw a circle, draw, 2 other circles, and draw the rest of the owl sort of thing, where it's just kind of like, I feel like there's some steps we skipped here that I was supposed to understand.
Well, and like the music thing with that harp that we did, like the first night we were playing, and we had the technically we had the solution.
Yeah.
But we hadn't actually done the like content we needed to do before it would even work.
Yeah.
Which
we had to unlock
we had to figure that out
part of it.
But then 2, the way we were interpreting their hint wouldn't have worked anyways, because the way you had to put like notes onto this harp, and we thought that if it was a double space, that meant like 2 pegs, but it really meant like a peg and an empty space.
Yeah, like a rest.
And there was really no way to determine that other than trial and error.
Yeah.
So yeah, it felt like you said that there were some leaps that maybe should have been filled in, and it would have been, or just simplify them down a little bit, like that coffin blanket one with the symbols. Just take the blanket part out.
Yeah.
Just have me look at the symbols on the wall that I got the hint from the book, and then it probably would have been something solvable without having to look up.
Yeah. Yeah, because I feel like the sweet spot any game with puzzles is wanting to hit is like you want people to be able to figure them out without looking it up.
Right.
Like you want to give them enough challenge that they have to stop and think.
Yeah.
But not so much challenge that it's like, this is too complicated, I give up. Throw my hands up. I'm going to go look it up.
Yeah, you don't want it to lose the fun. Like when I hit those points, I'm like, I'm not having fun. And now I have to type into my phone, and then I have to look at some of the worst mobile optimized websites I've ever seen that are 98% ads and then 75% AI generated words to hit their like SEO to finally get to the solution at the bottom. And it's like, man, this is just not a fun experience.
Yeah. So I would say that the puzzles that I've run into and done were definitely the ones that we just talked about were kind of they were outliers. I feel like that one specific like puzzle dungeon that we're talking about was definitely an outlier of, but like that was probably the most like complicated puzzly thing that I like. They had like they had the Indiana Jones like leap of faith.
Yeah,
like,
that was the same one where you had
invisible
like,
bridges or whatever. Yeah. And it's just like, okay. And then they didn't have like a ton of invisible walls in this game, but that specific area had like 3 that you had to like wander through just randomly to like get everything. And it was like, all right, okay. Like this is a lot.
Yeah, I felt like whenever they did the puzzles were definitely the weakest link for me. Some of them, like you said, weren't nearly that bad.
Yeah.
And there were some where like that same dial that you were trying to get the symbols for and what we're talking about, there was another dial puzzle like that I came across, and it just unlocked. I don't even know what I did. If I lucked, like I selected it and just was one symbol off and happened to accidentally get it. But I just like skipped that puzzle. And the thing is, the other thing that's kind of irritating is when you get frustrated with a puzzle and you look it up, at least you're done.
Yeah.
In most video games. This video game, because of the procedural nature of it, a lot of times it's like, all right, these are the steps, but because every game world is different, your symbols are going to be different. You still have to go through and do all that. You can't just go to the end and plug in the solution.
Right.
So then it's like, I was hoping to be done with this, but now I still have to show my work essentially and do like all the steps to get to the end.
Yeah, because there was like one puzzle in one of the dungeons where it was like there was a safe that was locked and you had to go like try to find the numbers to get into the safe. And looking it up was like, it's always some combination of these 4 numbers, but you don't know the order. And so like there were numbers written all over the wall and you basically had to like go shine your flashlight around until one of them lit up. And it's like, okay, that's where that one is. Which was cool. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that's a better execution of like the trick is looking at the walls and finding the numbers. That's not too bad. There was no middle step that was like, and also you have to run across an invisible bridge with arrows shooting at you or something to get there.
Exactly. But there were a lot of really cool, like, puzzly ones too. I thought, like, there's a specific boss in the second, like, in the labyrinth that you go to, where it's like, boss is like generous, but it's like a bunch of big
They gave it a health bar, so it's a boss.
It's a bunch of big cubes that are just like kind of moving around, and you have to like figure out how to like shoot all of the like weak spots on various cubes without getting smashed by the cubes. And like you can blow up like holes in them so that like you can stand, like it'll try to crush you, but you can just like kind of crouch under it and be safe. I thought that was really cool. There was another quote unquote boss encounter thing that we did, I think maybe our first night, where it was like
the lightning.
Yeah, we touched a thing and then lightning started coming down slowly from the ceiling, and so we had to like run down this big spiral staircase while fighting off enemies and trying not to die.
But lightning was also on the floor,
so if you ran too fast, then you would
we died like 3 or 4 times before we stopped, and we're like, okay, the game wants us to think a little harder about this because we're just trying to run and gun and it's not working.
Yeah.
But see, those I think are more curated, like end of dungeon experiences versus the environmental puzzles to like find a cool ring or whatever.
Exactly.
Those I agree. I think those are cool. It was the more side puzzle type things that I thought got frustrating and I think either need to be improved or just taken out of Remnant 3.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things too where it's like, you know, I look at it and I'm like, am I just not as smart as the average Remnant player, where I'm just like not understanding what I'm supposed to do in this moment? But yeah, I think there were definitely some points where it was just kind of like, all right, a little like making this a little bit clearer on what you're supposed to do is probably the way to go in the future for some of these iterations. Because a lot of the really cool stuff that I liked reminds me of things like Destiny 2 or like Call of Duty Zombies or something like that, where it's like there are enemies, but they're more of like an obstacle in the way. And I'm trying to like do the puzzle.
Right.
And solve that to beat the boss. And I really enjoyed that stuff. I thought that was really cool. But yeah, then there were occasions where it's like, I don't understand what I'm supposed to do here. Like,
yeah.
And those, you know, I think where it was just like a couple of points throughout. And it was also, there was one where I knew exactly what I was supposed to do, but I just couldn't. It was like in the Victorian Gothic world. And you basically, it's like playing chess. And it moves the rooms around. So it's like a 3x3 grid, and like you have 3 pieces, the opponent has 3 pieces, and wherever they move their pieces, all the doors are locked, and wherever you move your pieces, all the doors are unlocked. And so you're trying to like move your stuff around to try to unlock all of the different rooms so that you can like get the stuff that's in them. But then it's also like, if they ever get 3 in a row, it like curses you and takes a big chunk off of your health. And so you can only fail it so many times before it just kills you.
Right.
And I was awful at like, I would be thinking like 2 moves ahead and not see the obvious like 3 in a row they were about to get. And I was just like, come on.
Yeah, I never got that one.
Yeah, that was a pretty cool one. And then the other one that I remember running into was the, you talked about earlier, that was the trial or whatever, and it was like 3 different people, and we had to figure out who tried to assassinate the king.
Yeah.
And we were just kind of like, so is the answer in this room? Did we go somewhere else? Like, what are we doing here? And it was just, it would have been helpful for like there to have just been like a dialogue line that they said where it's like, okay, well, the king is like in over here, you know, further along, like go find him, investigate, come back to us, you know?
Yeah, and that one, we did the thing, but I didn't understand what we were doing.
Yeah.
Like, we went in and we like flipped the room and we were then in the floor and then we matched up some colored gems and then we came back and then we ended up finding like the evidence behind the king on his throne and stuff. But that one, it was like, we're doing the thing. I'm matching the colors. I don't know why. I don't really understand what's happening here. It's cool. It looks cool. It's very visually impressive. And that was probably one of my favorite worlds as far as like setting. But I was just connecting dots and didn't really understand the why behind it for that one. But yeah, so the puzzles, some good, some not so good, but the gameplay itself, I think they really like nailed it. It feels really good to play. There's a lot of cool weapons with abilities. I had a gun with just a bunch of like fingers dangling off the side, and they would like move, but it would like steal the life of my enemies and stuff. So you get a lot of really cool kind of supernatural abilities to play with, and then you have your various archetypes. I started as a medic, so I had more healing abilities, and then unlocked the archetype that let me have a dog companion, and then unlocked the one that let me like summon in other types of companions to help me fight. And that was really helpful for being kind of a heal class, being able to like let them go out and tank damage or negate some of my damage and stuff like that. So I think the gameplay and the combat and all how that all comes together and the co-op, all that is great. And I think, we'll probably only see incremental improvements in whatever they do next with this series. Really, the puzzles was kind of my only complaint.
And those were, I felt like, for in my games anyway, at least few and far between. Like, I don't feel like I got a ton of the puzzle stuff. It was maybe like one a zone where I was kind of just like, what am I doing here? What's going on?
Yeah, it was just very obvious when they showed up because you were like, that was the only time you felt stuck.
Yeah,
in
exactly.
This game. There were a couple of bosses or areas where I like felt stuck combat wise, but most of the time it was puzzles holding me back.
Yeah, but yeah, it was a lot of fun though. Of like, I don't know. I like when a game is not just like, don't get me wrong, I like games like Borderlands or whatever, but there's always a point in those games where I'm just kind of like, so I'm just like dumping bullets into this boss for 5 minutes because it's just like a health bar. And so I like games like this where it is a little bit more of like, you're doing something that's not just dumping bullets into a boss, It's
more active, and more. A lot of the boss fights do have some puzzle elements to them, which I think those worked.
Like there was a boss I fought the other day where it was like 3 different platforms, and it also had like a big robot, and so like you would fight the big robot, and once you like did enough damage, the boss would like come over and heal the robot, and then it would start like just shooting a big wave of energy down like one of the 3 platforms, and so you had to like jump across to a different platform to then keep shooting at the boss and stuff. And so it was a cool little like don't stand in the fire sort of mechanic that added a little bit more of entertainment, I would say, to the game. Now, you did talk a little bit about your build.
Yeah.
And like some of the weapons. I think I was running mostly, I started as the Challenger, which is kind of like the big tanky melee class.
Yeah.
And I was enjoying it, but then also like I think I hit a point where that was getting me killed a lot.
Yeah, melee's cool in this game, but it's a shooter.
Yeah. Like it feels good for melee in a third person shooter, but it was also like I got this cool gun and I want to use it more.
Exactly. You're picking up way more cool guns than cool melee weapons.
Exactly. So I think I ran mostly the class with the dog and then like the summoner class I had like a bunch of summons, and then I had a gun that when I shot things made them bleed. And then I had a bunch of like rings and amulets and stuff where it was like when something within 50 feet of you is bleeding, like you regenerate health, and when your summons do damage, you regenerate health, and when you regenerate health or when you get healed, you get like everything that you do is faster. You reload faster, you do this faster, etc. And so it was like I was able to put together a pretty cohesive build pretty easily.
Yeah.
As I continued playing the game further and further, I now have like so many rings and amulets that I'm like, whew, I would have to actually like sit down and like individually go through each one of these, or just find a build online, because
sorting through all of it. Yeah.
Sorting through like all of it feels overwhelming now. But I will give it that it was pretty easy to make it. I didn't look it up or anything. I just kind of like, oh, this seems like it pairs well with my gun.
Yeah. I looked up a build initially to kind of give me some inspiration to where I was like headed. And then, I mean, Fextra Life has some stuff on this game, but there's not a lot out there. And also it's a lot of like, pair this with this, with this, with this, with this, and you're going to be broken. But they don't really tell you how to get those things.
Yeah.
And then if you do find someone that explains it, like on a Reddit thread or whatever, it's like, roll this world, hope you get this sequence instead of this one, and then it goes into this one, and then if you do this at the end, you'll get this drop. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to do any of this. So then I just started kind of doing it on my own. And like on the base difficulty, you can just kind of cobble together a build. Like what you did was a lot tighter than what I had going on, but I was still able to finish the game. I beat the final boss solo. Like I think where you really need to like focus in and tighten up your build is if you're playing on like the hardest difficulty, trying to get whatever that gives you.
Yeah, where things are like two-shotting you or something. Yeah, like that's definitely it definitely feels like where that part shines. But it is one of those where it's like, as long as you find a gun you like shooting, and like you can put together some sort of a build without too much of a hassle that works and will get you through the game, you know?
Yeah, and I love the dual archetype system where you can have two, because then you can kind of play around and mix and match with what works for you. But just in a lot of these games, you kind of pick your class and then you're stuck with it. Whereas this one, being able to just kind of swap them out whenever you wanted and mix a few together, I thought was a really cool way to add more customization and flexibility. But also, if you realized, a third of the way in the game that you didn't want to be the class that you picked, it was really easy to just kind of transition into something else.
Yeah, like once we figured out how to unlock the new archetypes, it was like, oh, okay, like this is actually not too bad, because you can unlock, like you pick your first archetype and then you can unlock 4 others just by like buying an item at like in the hub world.
Yeah.
And then each zone has its own specific archetype that you have to like do something special to get. The forest zone, like you had to hunt these creatures while it was a blood moon out or something like that. And you would get like some blood moon coins or something.
Trade in the currency for it. Yeah.
And then like the space world, you had to like venture into like the poison atmosphere and like find an item on the ground. And then the Victorian Gothic one, you had to like find you had to investigate a bunch of like sewer grates, and in one of the sewer grates a creature would like grab you and drag you in to a different zone, and then that's where it was. And then there was one that they've come out and said like, oh yeah, no one was going to find this. It was like the data mined one. So that one, you had to wear, like every piece of your gear had to be a specific piece of gear. It's like you have to have this gun and this sidearm and this weapon, or this melee weapon. You have to be wearing this amulet and these 4 rings, and then you have to have this relic, and you have to have this armor. And then if you put all of those things on, your character becomes distorted, and then you can jump through like this other place in the labyrinth and find like one more door that takes you to the back rooms where you can run around and find the item that you need for that. And so definitely had to be data mined, because you have to get specific items, which means you just have to luck into your game rolling that, and then you have to luck into, oh, I'm wearing all of these things in the right time, in the right sequence.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like all of the ones that I've kind of unlocked, like I've unlocked all of them except the DLC one.
Right.
And so they all seem like they're cool. The only other one that I've really used a bunch of was the Engineer, which is the one you get from like the space world. And you get the ability to like summon a turret, basically.
Oh, right.
It can be like a machine gun turret, a flamethrower turret, or I think like a rocket turret or something. And so it can either just shoot by itself, or you can like pick it up as like a heavy weapon and shoot it like a little minigun.
Nice.
So that one's been kind of cool. I've liked it.
So what else do you want to touch on before we move into our verdicts for this game?
How did you feel about the length of the game? Because that was one of the things that kind of surprised me, was it was not as long as I was expecting it to be. Like it was, I think I beat it in like 15 to 20 hours, roughly. Like rolled credits, obviously, like have now played it for at least double that, just like unlocking other stuff. But it was like, looking at it initially, I was kind of like, okay, so, you know, like there's going to be like 3 worlds, and then like we're going to go to like another 2 or 3 worlds, like total. I was thinking like 5 or 6 different zones. And then like the final boss or whatever. And it's like basically 3 worlds and then the final boss, and then you're done.
Yeah, you have to do a little bit first time you get to the labyrinth, but you don't have to after that. I think for me it was good. I could see an argument for maybe wanting a couple additional worlds, a little more variety, especially on replay.
Yeah.
Because of the type of game it is, I think that it's a good length, because if you do get into that loop of just like hunting for gear or whatever, having it not be too long is a good thing. I think also because it's not a $70 game.
Yeah.
It's not too bad. Like when I finished the final boss, I had done like one adventure on the side, and I think I was at like 20 hours or so. And I was like, that seems respectable for a game that wants you to do that again.
Yeah.
And again. And so you could, like, if you get really into this game, you could put like 100 hours into it theoretically. If it was just like Outriders, where you get to the end, and I mean, technically Outriders had stuff to do, but it was like, you're done, you know, you get to the end and you're done. I might have been a little bit like, well, I kind of wish there was more.
Yeah.
I'm curious if they're going to, I don't know if they have a roadmap or anything, but if they were going to put out like DLC, some new worlds or something, that would be cool. But yeah, I guess I'm fine with it. I'm good with it for the type of game it is. I think that I guess I could see the argument for wanting a little more variety or a couple other just biomes, even if you only played 3 of them per run, maybe having some randomization, like other than the order. It could be which of the 5 am I going to get, you know? Something like that could be cool. But just purely lengthwise, I think I'm good with it.
Yeah. Yeah. Cause I think that's where I come down on it too, where it's like, I wasn't upset. Like, if anything, I wanted more. But I don't think that's like necessarily a point, and it's like to its detriment.
Didn't overstay its welcome, which is
exactly
nice.
I do think it would be cool to see one of these where, like you said, maybe there were additional zones, and it was like you still did the 3, but you just didn't get all of them, or, you know, something like that, where it gives it a little bit more longevity. I know they do have like a DLC pass, like a season pass or DLC pass or whatever that you can get. So I know that they're planning on at least doing 2 DLCs if they're selling a pass, because they had the one come out, and then I assume the pass will get you at least one other, if not more. And then I don't know if there's additional, like, you know, updates and stuff that they may add in, because I like I said, it was definitely very cool. I liked what I played of it. I was wanting more, and I know that there's like side dungeons that I could go back and experience that I maybe haven't seen yet, but having run through like both main storylines for each zone, it's kind of like, oh, okay, well, that's, I wish there was more to this that I could experience. But ultimately, though, I do think it's a good length. And like you said, if they want you to replay it, 15 to 20 hours is not a huge burden to replay, you know?
Yeah, I think about like the argument against having 5 worlds, but you only play 3. I guess the adventure mode kind of solves this, but if you are just trying to run it and get drops, like certain drops, but then you have that additional layer of randomization to have to deal with, like I could see that being tedious.
Yeah.
But
well, I think it depends on what you're like. A big part of the game for me was just kind of the discovery and exploration aspect.
Yeah.
And so like now that I've hit the point where I've seen pretty much most to all of it, I'm like, okay, well, I wish there was more to see, you know, versus if you're playing it to like optimize a build and have the biggest damage numbers and stuff. It's like I can see that being a hassle because it's like, well, I don't want as much. I want less randomization because I am specifically going for this drop or something like that. But that is too something that is coming to mind that I want to touch on. And I think we touched on this in our episode where we talked about Remnant already, but like just there are different ways to approach every final boss. Like the wolf boss that we both got in our first zone, there are like 5 different options of how you can approach that.
Again, it determines what you get at after the fight.
Yeah, because like the wolf basically is like, hey, like here's the doe, here's the wolf. You can either heal the doe, kill the wolf by shooting it, kill the wolf by talking to it and saying, no, I'm not going to heal the doe. Or like maybe like one other, I think, like fight the wolf and have it kill the doe during the fight, or fight the wolf and have it and keep the doe alive during the entire fight sort of thing. So there's like a bunch of different ways that you can go about actually like doing that fight that all affect the reward you get at the end. And then from what I've seen in some of the other ones too, it's like there was a boss in the space world where it's like you can either fight it, or you can like put in some sort of code, like you can find some extra keys or codes or something like that, and that changes what the fight is. Or you fight this guy who, you know, it was like the imposter king one. It's like it's like, here is the light side version of him, here is the dark side version of him. You can kind of freely go back and forth and talk to them. And then the final boss is whichever one of those 2 that you want to end up fighting. And it's like mostly the same fight, but it affects the reward that you get at the end. And so just that kind of stuff I thought was pretty cool, where it's like, oh, okay, like this is kind of a neat mechanic where it's not just here is the boss, here is the reward. It's like, well, you pick, you know?
Yeah, I think it's really cool just how they integrate and intertwine randomness into the game. And it's like, it's not random once you know, okay, so if I heal the doe, this happens or whatever. But like just going through the game, if we just each played it in a vacuum and then talked to each other about our experiences, it'd be like, how did you get that from the same boss fight that I did? So like, even though in some senses, like it feels, you were saying earlier that maybe the marketing was a bit like exaggerated on the level of randomness and replayability, but it's like the randomness goes so deep into like a lot of the core mechanics in very subtle ways that it's really cool. A lot of the stuff that they kind of experimented and played around with as far as what can we randomize to make each playthrough feel distinct or surprise the player in some new way.
Yeah. And it's again one of those things where I know I'm coming at it from a very like I like exploration in my games, and that's like my big thing. And so it's like the more that I explore, the less new stuff there is in the game. And so it's kind of like that diminishing returns of like, this isn't as cool anymore because I'm not.
Yeah.
But it does do a lot of really cool stuff where it's, and like you said, we live like, I guess I think about like if we had this game as kids, you know, where there wasn't like the best you could do was like game facts, and it was like just text. There were no pictures. If there was a picture, it was some like weird ASCII thing that they tried to like do.
Yeah.
And just kind of being like playing through the game and being like, well, this is what happened in my game. What do you mean yours is completely different? That kind of stuff would be pretty awesome. And so like you lose a little bit of that. Like, number one, neither of us are playing it at launch. So it's not like all of the stuff has pretty much been discovered already. But then also we're not we live in the day and age of the internet where all of that stuff is accessible easily at our fingertips versus, having some sort of cool, I don't know, kind of conversations about like, oh, my game was completely different. So
yeah, we did still have some of those like conversations just on us, like about that wolf fight. Like I didn't know until you told me that you got a gun and I had gotten a staff, and it was like, oh. And so then we kind of explored that. So yeah, I just think it's definitely a cool thing that this game does. You ready to move into our verdicts?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, let's go ahead and roll into our verdicts for this episode. So the way we do our verdicts, the way that we rate games on the FN Gamers review scale is with the classic A through F grading scale. But the best possible grade that a game can get is S. S is a masterpiece. It is above A. If you're a gamer, if you've been playing games for a long time, you're aware of this scale. With that being said, where would you put Remnant 2, Dylan?
I would give it an A. For me, I think this is a extremely fun game. I really enjoyed the exploration aspects of it. I thought there was a lot of cool, just like discovery that I was having as I was playing through the game, especially like going in blind to it. And then I also liked all of the puzzle aspects. There were a couple of ones that were caused some friction, where, I kind of slowed to a crawl and I had to look something up. But for the most part, I enjoyed like the puzzles, especially when I'm saying puzzles too, I'm thinking of like some of those bosses where it was, it was not so much about dumping bullets into something. It was about figuring out like, how do I approach this? How do I what is the gimmick here? And I really enjoyed that stuff because it taps into things I enjoy from like sort of the PvE shooter type of thing, like Call of Duty Zombies, Destiny 2, even, some of the World of Warcraft stuff that I did back in the day, where it's like the things I enjoyed were not like, hey, stand here and like press all of these buttons in the correct sequence. It was like when you had to like do something and move around and work together was always kind of like the fun thing. So this scratches that itch for me. And like I said, my only complaint is that I kind of wish it had been a little bit longer, or there was more to keep looking at and discovering, because that was the part I really enjoyed about the game. And so the more that I've played it, the less I've gotten to see new stuff, which to me was kind of the main draw of the game. And, not that it's, I don't want to say that as like, oh, this game sucks because it's not long enough. It's more of like, it's similar to that experience I feel like I had with Jedi Fallen Order, where I beat that game, I 100%ed it, and then I was like, well, I kind of wish there was still some more to do because I really enjoy this game and this world, and that's kind of how I'm feeling about Remnant 2, where it's like, I really enjoy the game, I really enjoy the mechanics, I enjoy like figuring out the cool boss gimmicks. I'm just kind of out of I've seen most of them, if not all of them at this point. And I'm just like, I want some more to do. Maybe I'll pick up the DLC. Maybe I won't. We'll see.
For me, I will give this game a B. I think that the puzzles grated on me a little bit more than they did on you, it sounds like. And I had a lot of fun playing this game multiplayer. I think that it was a little bit less fulfilling for me playing solo, although I was motivated to finish it, and I did a lot of that solo. So definitely think it's worth playing even if you're by yourself. The game, like we've talked about, is meant to be replayed and seen over and over, and this conversation has helped me. I could see myself going and booting it up again tonight and just like playing around with it a little bit more. I don't know how long I will stick with that. I feel like I've finished the game at this point.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of how I play games. Like a lot of these games that promise an end game or a loop about getting stronger or getting ready for the raid or doing like, that's not the part of the game that hooks me usually. So even with that being said, and that I feel fulfilled after just that getting to credits experience, and I would still recommend this game to anybody who likes third-person shooters, who likes co-op games, who likes the Souls games. I think there's a pretty interesting Venn diagram of people that should try this game.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'd recommend it. I just think that for the type of gamer I am, and then some of the puzzle aspects to this game, it puts it more in the B territory for me.
For sure.
So that is Remnant 2. Kind of a surprise game for us as far as like playing it this year, doing a podcast episode on it. Like we both kind of just picked it up, then it came to Game Pass and we're like, this game is good. It's worth talking about. So if you would have asked me earlier in the year if we were going to do a full Remnant episode, I probably would have said, maybe, I don't know. But it's really cool that it made it here. We didn't really touch on it, but it's Darksiders developers that are involved in making this game. And so I love to see them continuing to do cool stuff and get a win, because I think that this game is generally pretty well regarded and received in its communities and just in the industry as far as like critical reception and stuff like that. So
yeah,
I'm excited to see what they do in the future, either with this franchise or, if they decide to spring off of this and do something else completely different. What do we got for housekeeping, Dylan? What's going on? I guess I'll do the podcast stuff real quick because we're in like the end of the year. We're going to do episode 100 will be our next episode. Very excited. Thank you to everybody in our Discord who has given us questions to answer on that episode. We're going to do a little bit of a retrospective and then do an AMA. That'll be a lot of fun. We have a couple different game of the year episodes that we're going to do. And then we have our predictions results episode that we have pretty much ready to go now that the Game Awards are over. So all that stuff I'm very excited about. It's a really fun time of year for making gaming content, but also I enjoy listening to those kind of episodes as well. So I'm excited. Hopefully you all are too. So stay tuned for those.
And if you're not, tough.
Yeah. If not, we also have our annual Christmas special coming up that is sure to be a lot of fun.
Yes.
So a lot of cool stuff on the podcast feed to be looking forward to. YouTube, Dylan, what's going on over there?
We are still trucking along on YouTube. If you're listening to this episode on YouTube, leave us a comment. Let us know that so that we know you exist and that you get your podcast service of choices. YouTube Music, I guess. I don't even know. But also we've kind of made some tweaks, some changes to how we're putting stuff out there. And so if you are interested in checking out our stuff that's usually way more shorter form, check out YouTube. We're doing some fun stuff over there. And we're having a good time with it. I think the next thing coming out, which will come out in a couple of days when you're listening to this, it'll come out Wednesday, I think is supposed to be Andrew's Phantom Liberty Cyberpunk sort of review thing.
It will be a Cyberpunk video. I have kicked around a couple different concepts for how I want to structure it, so we'll see which one ends up hitting the page.
So be on the lookout for that, because that'll be a fun one. Yeah, if you're listening to this podcast, especially if you listen to this podcast every week and you're not subscribed to our YouTube, at least just go subscribe to our YouTube. That would be cool too.
We're really close to 400 subscribers right now. So yeah, it'd be really cool to hit that before the end of the year.
Yeah. So keep kind of growing that up a little bit. And then eventually we'll unlock the ability to run ads on it, which would be nice.
Yeah, so we can run everyone away. No.
Yeah. What are you talking about? Everyone uses an ad blocker. So
yeah, true. The last thing I'll mention is Discord is the best way to interact with us and hang out with us. Join our Discord. There's a link in the podcast description. A lot of guests that have been on the show are in there. A lot of people in the community have joined. It's a really fun time, and we appreciate everybody that has joined already. That was how we got all of our questions for our upcoming 100th episode AMA. So if you want to be part of things like that in the future, Discord is the place to be.
Yep.
With all that being said, this has been our Remnant 2 deep dive episode. Thank you all so much for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.